it benefits the entire region. And so it benefits each state, but it benefits a region. If someone gets a degree in one and finishes it in another, but then returns to that home state to work, this is a benefit for the total region. And so one of the challenges with New England is we're very compact and tight and trafficky, but one of the benefits from that is it's very easy to talk across state lines. We don't really have to get on a plane to do that. So I think the benefit from here is to continue that success that NEVI has had in working with individual states and with institutions to address concerns, whether it's between two institutions working together or two states or the region. So as we are asking for specific takeaways and ways in which we can be helpful, please keep that in mind. We'll be doing that at the end of this panel, but also in follow-ups with you, and we really would like to make that part of the agenda that NEVI is moving forward for you. So thanks.
Tara. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be in Worcester. As a child, I grew up in Worcester, Mass. And every family function was always in Rhode Island, and so Worcester was that great middle point. And as a little one, for those of you who are from the area, I can remember my parents would say, "We're almost ready where you can wave to the polar bear." So those of you who know the Polar Beverage Company has this big mascot on the top of the building, and look at right winds, it'll give you a wave. So I can remember that as a child, we were driving through and it was like, yes, we're halfway there to Grandma's. Yes. So it was nice to come back. I also remember my mother saying, "Imagine going to that school and lugging a backpack up those hills." And across it, and my brother, of course, wound up applying. So early awareness, early college access matters. That's what I would say from that. But it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to have this tremendous panel with us to talk a little bit about some of the state initiatives that are happening. My interest at Granite State College, which is part of the university system, so along with our sister institutions of Keene, Plymouth, UNH Law. And our organization is a little bit more focused on adult populations. So we actually have 86% of our students are transfers. 1 in 7 of our students are military affiliated. And 70% of our financial aid dollars go to military affiliated students. So I'm learning so much today and getting so much information from this, but for us it's so much about affordability too, and helping these adult students to be in the workforce, this incumbent workforce that is trying its best to manage family responsibilities and returning to school, and thinking about the way that we message to them about the importance of the credits that they have and how they won't have wasted credits and they won't have wasted dollars, and there's a way for us to maximize that has been incredibly important for our organization. But it's now time to turn over to our panel. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to introduce Chuck Ansell, the Associate Vice Chancellor of Finance and Strategic Planning for the Community College System of New Hampshire. If you just give a hello. Kenneth Klushtik as the Transfer and Articulation Co-Manager for Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. Thank you for being here. Robin McGill is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Rhode Island Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner. Elena Kirill-Lavanis is the Chief of Staff and Director of Academic Policy and Student Success for the Mass Department of Higher Ed. Thank you for being here. And Jeanette Sorter is the Chief Academic Officer of the Maine Community College System. So thank you, Janet, for being here. We're going to open it up with just a general question for each of our panelists, and then we have a few questions that we've identified, and of course then we'll open it up to the room for your questions. So if we could begin by having each of you talk a little bit about your current, either if you want to highlight policies or initiatives that you have going on in your state for a few minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us here. I'm going to start by talking about our current process for transferring students within the Connecticut State College and University system. And I'll start with just a quick background. We're 17 institutions. We have 12 community colleges and we have 4 four-year institutions. And in 2012, a policy was created that mandated that we create seamless transfer between the community colleges and the four-year schools. And I'm just going to point out a couple things here to kind of structure that degree, but this is really our policy lever that made it possible for us to make this advances that you'll see in the slides coming up. First of all, we have something like the WICHE passport. We have 30 credits of competency-based general education. And part of what Candace was mentioning earlier about reverse transfers, Students have to complete these 30 credits, and then they go over from the community college to the state university, and Alicia's going to cringe here, and they have to be received as a block. And if that block is not completed, then they go back to what is the traditional way of accepting those credits, and that is course by course. And when Candace was mentioning that idea of how long do you keep that window open, it's a really big question for our four-year schools, because they're kind of doing a double audit and keeping a double audit open until that student completes or reverse transfers. And I see a registrar here. And thank you, by the way. Thank you, by the way, for all you do. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I want to talk just a moment about that, and I'll probably come back to it later. One of the things that's critical is this idea of automation, of really working out the details and nuts and bolts for how things transfer. I can't tell you how difficult it is to reach this result. The two students with the same transcript get received the same way. The likelihood of that happening is pretty slim at most four-year universities. And so you really need to think about how you set it up so you can reach that kind of goal. So I'm just going to take you quickly through what it looks like. This is a page you've already seen. Candace is going to now click on, thank you Candace, on the link and take you to our page. It's going to show you what we see now when students are interested in transfer. We've organized our transfer pathways by degree. I mean, I know there were some questions about this with the WICHE passport, and that is the question of what happens when some of the courses in general education are burdened by a major. So yeah, you took your science requirement, but you didn't take the right science for your major, right? Your general education comes over, you get credit, but suddenly you have 8 extra credits to complete in the degree. And this is one of the reasons we went program by program. Some programs, it's interchangeable. You can really carry that passport or that 30 credits over regardless of the degree. But in many cases, because the general education gets burdened by the major, we've done it program by program. So, am I? Okay. Well, I'll go on from there, and we can come back and fill in. Are we not getting the internet link?
We have the internet display.
If you can just imagine what you would see. So on that slide, you might have seen a list of majors. And how we have it set up is a student would choose a major, and in the first step would choose a community college. And then in that community college and clicking on that, would get the full 60 credit program for the community college degree. What we've added to that is a third step that the student can then click on any one of the receiving programs and find out exactly the 60 credits that will remain after the student transfers. It's essentially a 4-year catalog. And one of the requirements of the policy is that the degree has to be same at all the community colleges. Don't be really fooled with a list of 12 colleges. This is kind of the way students think about it. It's also partly a matter of which courses would count in general education. Student needs to know which ones are present at the student's own college. But that's the same degree at the community colleges. And then that transfers to all of the 4-year schools. The student does not have to sit down with an advisor and decide ahead of time which school do I want to go to. All of the schools that have the program will accept this community college degree. And so the student can, even at the end of the 2-year process of the associate degree, look at the options. In business, there are, I think, 17 options, programs the student can transfer into with the one community college degree. And the student can say, look and say, what do I want to do? What are the options? What do the different schools offer? And maybe even the schools can work with the students to provide some financial aid or whatever it might be. So you said you would take us through something with chemistry, and I think we're going to go to Quinebaug Valley. Because we're going to see something here that's going to weigh on reverse transfer. I just want to add this in to go back to the earlier conversation for a moment. Quinebaug Valley is a very small school and does not offer organic chemistry. So one of the ways students can complete that, and this is part of our reverse transfer policy, student can complete all of the courses except for the organic chemistry and then transfer it to the 4-year school and complete it at the 4-year school. This is one reason we need this policy, because sometimes the schools are too small and there's nothing in the region for the schools to be, for the student to be able to complete it. So there's the Quinebaug course sequence, and Candace can maybe get us back to seeing which 4-year school where a student might want to transfer. It's easier for the students, believe me. If we just scroll down to that third step, we don't have to click on a program sheet. But here are all the programs that will receive that chemistry degree. And any one of those links will show the student what's left in 60 credits. The idea, and sorry to registrars to put this burden on the shoulders, is that that transfer has to be recorded. The transfer audit and the grad audit, these are the things that work magically together, have to work together so that if the student completes the community college degree, the promise is that is all that will remain, what comes up when you click on the four-year school. And so we're trying to audit, this is a great word, we're trying to automate that as much as possible. The more you have individual people having to figure that out every time and follow instructions, the harder it is. And it's a real challenge. We took a couple years to put the program maps together. It turned out that wasn't so much the big challenge. Faculty are curmudgeons and all that kind of stuff, we know that, but we're both faculty, so we can say that about them. But the real hard work came the day we sat in the room with the registrar and said, just do this for us. And we got the big, you want us to do what? And so we're getting an enormous amount of help, and we can't thank people in registration, admission, advising, IT, enough for the work they're going to do to make this work for students so they don't have to, as we used to say, walk down the hallway with their syllabuses for a semester trying to get credit for courses so that they can figure out what's left. And then, yeah. And then just one more real slide. Part of the advantage of the way we've done this thing, and part of the complications we've seen in other states, and we've looked at a lot of other, we looked at a lot of other states, is how often agreements are partnerships. And I know John and Doug have talked about this, and the importance of partnerships between individual schools. But every one of those agreements has to be maintained. And so our math is pretty straightforward. We have 22 pathways that feed into 26 majors because some of them go into several majors. We have to maintain 22 agreements. If each of those agreements was made separately between all the schools, you'd have 1,320 agreements that would have to be maintained. So that sort of centralization has really been important to us. Candace and I, whoever continues in the role that we're in, will be responsible. We re-meet the faculty every year to go over programs. If changes have been made, we make those changes. But we need to do that for 22 programs. We don't need to do it for 1,320 programs. We do that annual review, and we update the website. So maintenance, all of this was with an eye to maintenance as well, so we can maintain it. I'm showing you the public website, the website that you saw. We also have a back room website called the HVAC website, and that has all the information about what's coded and how it's coded. The degree works and such information, and we could have a conversation. You asked a great question, and I don't know your name, but you asked a great question about how the courses are attributed so that when they're received at the four-year school, you know which courses count for general education and such. We've got registrars working on using DegreeWorks and a combination of DegreeWorks and Banner to make that happen. And all that information is contained in a back room, kind of back scene website. Other than that, we just can repeat, it's a program that guarantees that if students complete 60 credits in a degree program and transfer in one of these pathways, they'll be able to finish in 60 credits when they get to the four-year school. It's a guarantee we make of them. And the little phone is just to thank our webmaster who does all this web work for us, and it works on all kinds of devices. He does a great job. Thank you.
Maine. So in Maine, the transfer landscape is created, planted, and maintained by the faculty and the leadership of the two systems. We don't have any overarching policies or coordination. It's all between us. Last year we have data for was fall of 17. 704 students transferred from the community college system to the University of Maine system. another couple hundred transferred outside of the Maine Public University system. And our students like to stay in Maine. And if they leave Maine, they don't care where they go. They go all over the country. They don't even stay in New England. It's amazing. And it's just like people walking one by one across the country. So it's really an interesting pattern to look at. We have two primary tools that we're using for transfer right now. One of them has been in existence for quite a while, and that is Main Street, but it has continually gone through what I would call technical upgrades. So Main Street is a web tool developed by the University of Maine system. It started off as kind of a, look up your courses, catalog, drop-down kind of thing, tied to all 7 of the Maine community colleges. It now has a transfer guide that's very interactive. Students it will pull in any courses that a student has taken at any campus of the University of Maine system. It has a self-report function, so the student and their advisor can load all of the courses they've taken at the community college into it, and it will give them an audit for the program, how credits will come in, what they have left to take, and all the credit for that goes to my colleague Rosa. All of the 7 community colleges link to Main Street. They always have, so on our transfer pages, on the websites for each community college, the students and their advisor can just go there and access that tool. It's really pretty slick. In 2016, we developed a block transfer agreement for our associate arts degree. It works a lot like the Witchy Passport, it turns out. This was a major undertaking. So we will transfer up to 34 credits. It was built on the value rubrics, the LEAP value rubrics. It is a transfer not just between the university system and the community college system, but among the university campuses and among the community colleges. Our wish is that we will move on to the associate in science degree, which has a substantial gen ed block, not quite as big as the AA, and do something like that. But when we go there, then we're going to have to deal with some of the issues Connecticut talked about. So you'll get a science course or a math course, but it isn't the right one for nursing. So that's kind of the next big adventure for us. We have reverse transfer, which was talked about a lot. And I regret to say that we still have hundreds of articulation agreements. But we are moving towards more a guided pathway where we'll try to pull people in, and we aspire to do much like what Connecticut has done and not have quite so many articulation agreements to maintain. I mean, we're really moving from really personal relationships between the local community college and the local university, or the university campus that had that program that everybody wanted to send their students to. So that will be an interesting journey, I shall say. We have some really interesting hybrid pilots that people are trying to see what works. One is with University of Southern Maine and 3 of our community colleges in their region that are kind of trying out a connected pathways approach to transfer. We are a very large state with 7 community colleges and 7 university campuses spread all over the state, and some of them are in low population density areas of the country. Of the state. That relationship between the local community college and the local university can be a really important one. So you'll see that kind of organic agreement between them to try to get people to move on. As we said, we are not burdened with statewide policies. We also don't have the impetus that a statewide policy can give you to move on things. It's really that goodwill and a deep caring about the future of our students, of the employment environment in our state that I think really keeps us going. We have worked hard on a common set of PLA practices as a foundation. We are working on reciprocity for some of the more subjective assessments in PLA, so the students won't have to be reassessed when they transfer. We have been working on a statewide nursing articulation agreement for, yes, decades. And we are still hopeful that we may actually get one someday. Yeah. We will not say one word about nursing faculty, not one. We also have a very collaborative relationship between the chief academic officers of all 14 of the institutions of higher ed, and we have formed 4, I think, very important working groups in areas of shared concern that will impact transfer. One is math pathways. We're very concerned math is one of the biggest obstacles to success, successful transfer, successful completion of anything in our state. The community college system is moving towards, is working with the Dana Center to have a system-wide model, their model. We're going to bring in our university colleagues because there are huge transfer implications. So if we put a certain program on a specific math pathway and that's not the one they want, then that's going to be problematic. So we've really got to align all of that. Guided pathways, as I mentioned, college readiness, and the dual and concurrent enrollment. So are we starting students in high school with dual and concurrent enrollment and moving them through a pathway to a community college, a pathway to a community college to a university, or directly to a university? And really try to think about that less as a bunch of kids taking college courses in high school and kids getting on a meaningful pathway that really gets them college ready and really think about what they want to be when they grow up. So that's what we're doing in Maine.
So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in Massachusetts, and I'll do my best to stay within the 5 to 7 minute limit. I do want a mic, thank you. Before moving forward, I just want to thank the, 2 mics might be too much. One mic. I want to thank the team here from the department, and that includes Pat Marshall, Larry Dean, and Paul Roberta, as well as all of the friendly Massachusetts institutions that are represented here today. We have 15 community colleges, 9 state universities, and 4 undergraduate serving UMass campuses. And I'm happy that all 3 segments are here in the room. So thank you for all of the work that you do. What I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes wouldn't be possible without our work and partnership with the campuses. So thank you. And hopefully we won't have more work after today, but that never happens after an EBI conference. So maybe we'll have more. So Massachusetts has really undergone a transformation around the work and transfer. A lot of our work was rooted in the Commonwealth Transfer Advisory Group report that came out in 2009. And Massachusetts does have legislative authority to create a statewide transfer compact. One of the things that we've leveraged is trying to avoid any type of legislation mandating course equivalencies or statewide transfer pathways, and really wanting to make sure that, like Janet said, it was more organic and that we had the faculty involved. I'm glad to say that the one state senator that was really pushing this work has kind of backed off a bit and is no longer pushing that legislation. I don't think that was the right way to go, at least not for the Commonwealth. One of the things that we're constantly doing is updating the work that we do, so we're currently revising the mass transfer implementation guidelines and hope to release a new version or the next version of those next year. And we have a number of different components that fall under the mass transfer suite of programs. So we have a course equivalency database, and I'm going to go through each of those in greater detail momentarily. A statewide Gen Ed Foundation, A to B pathways, and that stands for Associate to Baccalaureate pathways. A program called the Commonwealth Commitment, as well as the reverse transfer policy that you just heard about, as well as transfer principles. One of the things that we've done is we've had study groups or focus groups with students to make sure that the language that we're using actually makes sense to them. So if you've been following the work in Massachusetts, you might have heard us talk about the mass transfer block, and that's what we used to call the Gen Ed Foundation. Students thought that that meant their courses were blocked from transferring, which is opposite. Everyone thinks that they're in mass transfer, even though they're not, so we started using the word associate to baccalaureate, A to B pathways. So really trying to be student friendly with the way we talk about transfer is a major thing that's in the Commonwealth. So our course equivalency database has over 11,000 courses. It's maintained and updated on an annual basis. Shout out to the registrars and the transfer staff that help us maintain this database. The courses that are in there, we originally started with equivalencies from community colleges to community colleges, and then expanded that to courses between 2- and 4-year institutions. First, we were looking at the courses that satisfied the Gen Ed Foundation, and then we broadened that to the disciplines where we have statewide transfer pathways. I think one of the next questions that Massachusetts will have to grapple with is, will this database then be, will the courses in the database actually mean that courses there are equivalent between 4 and 4? 4-year institutions, so state university to UMass campus, or the other way around. Right now it's just 2 to 2 and 2 to 4-year institutions. And also in that database, institutions can designate how a course satisfies the Gen Ed Foundation. So when a student goes onto our website, they can see what community college courses satisfies different part of the Gen Ed block. And that's not the database. This is our Gen Ed Foundation. As of June 2017, we now have 2 Gen Ed Foundations. The Gen Ed Foundation, the 34 credit version, this is actually statewide, so that means that a student, regardless of institution type, if they complete this, they satisfy their Gen Ed requirements. So if they're moving from a state university to UMass, that means their Gen Eds are satisfied, community college to community college. So it really is across the system. But because of our work when we were developing these statewide transfer pathways, particularly in STEM, we found that the 34 credit version wasn't really serving our community college STEM students. It was prohibiting them from taking the courses that they needed within their major. So what we did is we worked with the statewide group and agreed to essentially reduce the number of Gen Eds that would be required at the community college. Because we're a part of MEASC, all students still need to complete 40 credits if they're earning a baccalaureate degree, but it's one of those instances where we were learning from our campuses and our faculty and realized that we needed to change our practice in order to better benefit our students. One more thing I want to say about the Gen Ed Foundation. Massachusetts is very heavily investing in early college as well as dual enrollment. And when we give institutions funds to promote dual enrollment, those courses need to satisfy part of the Gen Ed Foundation. So we're being very intentional about that. And as we move forward with expanding early college across the Commonwealth, we want to make sure that the courses that students are signing up for are either satisfying the Gen Ed Foundation or are part of one of the associate to baccalaureate pathways. A lot of the work that we're doing is trying to be intentional about all of these different moving parts and making sure that we're not contradicting the work that we're doing. So these are statewide A to B pathways, and I won't show them to you live on the internet, but you can go to mass.edu/masstransfer and check them out. And these are statewide transfer pathways, and essentially depending on whether or not they're STEM, it includes the Gen Ed Foundation, courses within the major, and then electives or recommended courses, and they lead to an associate degree. And the idea here is that you can start within or at any community college and transfer to any public 4-year institution and take the same courses within the discipline. And the idea here is similar to what you heard in Connecticut. We have close to 2,700 articulation agreements for 28 undergraduate serving institutions, and that's just way too complicated for our students to try to navigate that. So really using these statewide transfer pathways to sunset those individual articulation agreements over the next 5 years. And we're really excited about reducing that number. I think at one point, folks really measured their success by how many individual articulation agreements they had with other institutions, and are really trying to move away from that. I hope the campuses are listening as I say that. And we have A to B pathways to over 40 majors. We just started nursing, and I hope it doesn't take a decade. So we started with biology, chemistry, economics, history, political science, and psychology. And a lot of this was really driven by the data. So we looked at what are the disciplines, the most popular transfer disciplines that students are moving between 2 and 4-year institutions. And you see them here. The other piece of data that we were looking at were what are the areas of workforce demand. So computer science is up there. Even though you don't see a lot of computer science students transferring from 2 to 4-year institutions, we know we need more baccalaureate degree holders in this space, so we created the pathway in order to incentivize that behavior. I will say that that was a fascinating pathway to build. Most Most of these pathways are built on course-to-course equivalencies, but in other cases they are block courses of credit. So computer science is where you're going to see a block of courses transferring. Nursing is actually another one where you're going to see a block of courses transferring. Liberal arts is really more seen as an advising tool. We were finding that students didn't understand what their liberal arts associate degree led to when they went to a four-year institution. So you had a lot of community college students saying they wanted to be STEM, but were in a liberal arts without being in the appropriate concentration. So when you look on the website, the liberal arts pathway tells a student, here are the majors that you can transfer to the four-year institution. If you don't see the major that you're interested listed here, either seek that pathway or look for the individual articulation agreement. And the work here around maintenance doesn't happen on an annual basis, it happens on a biannual basis, so we're actually in the process of reviewing the disciplines in cycle one. And one of the things that we found was we weren't necessarily paying attention to the math course when we were building these pathways. We were really interested in identifying the right course within the major. So we're also part of the Dana Center Math Pathways work. And one of the things that the disciplines are doing is identifying the appropriate math for their major. And we just are moving that work forward. We have 4 statewide math pathways: calculus, elementary education, statistics, and quantitative reasoning. So we're really interested in bringing that to scale. The Commonwealth commitment, this is the first iteration of the program. We're currently working in the second iteration of the program, and really this is the Commonwealth's affordability and completion initiative. We were trying to see whether or not we could incentivize students to go full-time by giving them a series of financial benefits. We're moving away from this direction, given that the majority of our community college students are part-time, and we want to make sure that we're meeting our students where they're at and not necessarily forcing them to do something that isn't going to work for them. So what I can briefly say about that is we're hoping to create a dual admissions program where a student would be conditionally accepted to a four-year institution, and if they meet all of the program requirements, then they're guaranteed acceptance. They'd also have special benefits at that four-year institution, like access to the library and being able to attend sporting events, as well as being given access to an advisor at that State University of UMass campus of their choice. And depending on whether or not they're part-time, full-time, Pell eligible or not Pell eligible, we'll differentiate on a grant that we'll give them at the beginning of every semester. I will say that this is a major, someone said this earlier, I think it was John Fink. In Massachusetts, you can start at a community college and transfer to a four-year institution, and if you graduate within 4 years, earn a baccalaureate degree for less than $27,000. So it's just automatically more affordable this way. With the Commonwealth commitment, if a student follows the pathway, and you look at all of the financial aid that they receive, both federal and in-state, it's closer to $15,000 for a baccalaureate degree. So I think a lot of the work that we have to do around marketing is making sure that students know that these affordable pathways are available to them. I won't go into reverse transfer because you've heard about that. And finally, transfer principles. We started off with these community college transfer principles to make sure that, as you know, students swirl from multiple institutions. They're not just following these lateral pathways from 2 to 4. So as they move across our system, how do we make sure that they're not being, that the students don't experience any harm from moving in this way? So creating these community college transfer principles to really make sure that we're treating all students the same, regardless of what their pathway is, has been a great experience. It actually was a request that came to us from the community college chief academic officer, so we're really seeing the campuses come to the system and asking us to help them in creating these system-wide policies, and we're really excited about the fact that our institutions are no longer thinking about me or my students, but they are thinking about our students. And finally, I use the word students because that's what this is all about. Everything that we do is to benefit our students. And we're really excited about moving in this direction, and I'm excited to hear about what the other panelists have to say.
All right, New Hampshire. Ooh, I'm off tempo. So I'm going to show a couple slides that kind of go into New Hampshire's transfer landscape and then move into the initiatives that we've got going on and really unpacking about 4 of them, or at least 4 that kind of create an overarching umbrella, if you will, of all the different initiatives that we have. It's probably hard to read, so I'll just say that about 2/3 of our students who transfer from the community college system end up in New Hampshire, and then for the remaining third, a third of those end up in Massachusetts, and then it's kind of spread out between all other states. With regards to where they go when they're in New Hampshire, we've got a really strong partnership with our public university system and our counterparts there. But by institution, you know, the SNU is picking up the majority of our, has the most of our students when they transfer out. And I imagine that that's not something that's just specific to New Hampshire, but is probably very much for lots of colleges in this room. Our transfer rates are growing. You know, there was, when I go into the initiatives that we've got going on in New Hampshire, there was a mention in the prior panel, or an analogy that was used with regards to reverse transfer, that the feeling, I forget which state, I think it was Rhode Island, said that they feel like they're at the bottom of a hockey stick, and then it's just going to skyrocket from there. And I feel that a lot of our initiatives are right there, right about now, that we're seeing a little bit of uptick, but lots of things are in flux. In our public system, we're seeing an increase in transfers from the community college system of New Hampshire to the university system, in particular to Granite State. And I think that makes a lot of sense because Susan alluded to it earlier at the outset of this panel discussion, but demographically, we've got a lot of challenges, obviously in New England, and very specifically in New Hampshire. We're going to have, out of all 50 states, I think we're tied with Connecticut here, in terms of having a 26% drop-off in high school students. So what's going to happen is that we're going to see colleges that cater more towards adult learners in the four-year space, that a lot of our students are going to go there, and that we're going to, you know, in turn, make sure that we're doing more with incumbent workforce to bring those students in. And I think that that's particularly pertinent for reverse transfer. I mean, we've talked about that in the context of enrollment, but in the prior panel, there was discussion of, there was a 60 by 25, a 70 by 25, we're at 65 by 25, like aspirationally in the middle of New England. And the only way that we're going to be able to hit that is by re-engaging everybody that we've lost, including in the four-year. So, you know, these sorts of, I really like these Lumina targets because they're at least proportional to whatever the state population is, and it kind of takes a little bit of the agenda away from enrollment and more to success. So the four initiatives that I wanted to talk about that we have going on, pathways and articulation, transfer support, data exchange, and just promoting a transfer mindset across New Hampshire. And I'll say that, you know, I've been in New Hampshire personally for about a little over a year now, and the slogan I've been told, you know, from job interview all the way till now is live free or die, and I think that there's a lot of commitment to that slogan. You know, there's really two choices, and one of them is a little more popular than the other. And so there's a lot of freedom, a lot of commitment to that independence, and I find that there's a really interesting tension where there's lots of great things that seem self-evident to do, and we would normally chalk off, oh, well, there's, you know, internal antagonism to something that could make a lot of sense, like reverse transfer, or, you know, outside of the transfer realm, like math pathways, co-rec remediation. We're not necessarily finding that. We're finding that there's a lot of momentum on this, and we're going to see that in these four areas. There's just not a lot of momentum to do it together. But I do think that we're getting there too. I think that momentum's being built in particular with my counterparts at the university system here right now, Mary Lynn and Elizabeth, and they could just as well be speaking to some of this information coming up. So we're creating 2+2s, and what that means specifically is we're trying to use, just like in the, I know Pathways is, you know, quite the thing right now, and it's very much the thing in New Hampshire because it's a great way to make sure that students not only learn, but that they're going to persist and actually plan out what courses they need to take so they don't waste any credits. And it's happening at the university system as well. And so what we're trying to do is make the Pathways an anchor point of transfer discussion. So we're trying to build not just, you know, the 4-semester pathway that we load into a system and have students register onto, but see if we can actually build 8-semester ones. Because one thing that's interesting, it's just been kind of serendipitous, this was not planned, is that the university system and the community college system, we both use Banner, we both use EAB, it's called Student Success Collaborative in their world, it's Navigate in ours. We both use Canvas, so the fact that there's all this technological layer that normally comes last and it's actually there first means that the culture is just going to need to catch up to processes and tech that's already in place. And so that's what's happening. There's some places where we're able to speed ahead. We've got a great grant with the Mellon Foundation called the Humanities Collaborative, and we're essentially using that to create universal program articulations across the community college system into the university system for pretty much all of liberal arts and social sciences. And frankly, we've already kind of got it going in STEM. So if we can, wrap that up, it might be one of these ways, again, going back to that hockey stick analogy, that we're able to move with lightning speed to get a lot of our transfer aims conquered. With regards to mitigating transfer shock, this is something that comes up, and it's been mentioned on this panel that, it's all well and good to take a top-down approach and say we're committed to reverse transfer and have these policies when, there's too much work to be done, or the people who are implementing it, you can't, I believe it was Ken who said, the idea that 2 transcripts will be evaluated in the same way is, a really slim chance. Well, what can we do to standardize that and to automate that and to build a really seamless transfer equivalency database across our colleges and the university system? And I would even throw out there, we've now heard from several states, this is our transfer equivalency system, or this is our 11,000 course database. Why can't we also share our databases when we start looking at regional things? Because if we know that we've got, for example, in New Hampshire, one of our popular transfer destinations in Massachusetts is UMass Lowell. And if we already have a lot of agreements with Lowell, and Lowell has agreements throughout their entire system, and you were to give us your database, then we would just go ahead and map it to the rest of Massachusetts and vice versa. So I think that could be one thing that could potentially come out of things like this is, laying those current state chunks of information and just laying it all out and seeing, do we already have 80% of the problem solved? But anyways, that was a digression. People, process, and technology. We're inventorying all student clubs right now to see if we can match up, if there's the student math club or something at one of our community colleges, and then there's one at Granite State. Is that something where not only is that an implicit recruitment tool to the 4-year, but it's also something that builds psychological momentum to degree attainment? Making sure that we do essentially the same thing at every level, with faculty matching departments, with student services, having admissions counselors talk to each other, that sort of thing. Processes, right now I know Mary Lynn is looking at orientations across the system and how we are treating transfer students from the community college system into the university system, and how strong is that orientation relative to native students for a 4-year university, and is it commensurate? Are we making sure that everybody's just as prepared and that there's little transfer shock? Assuring that the admissions process, I already touched on this, has easy access to all equivalency information, and then really doing all that we can to build off the fact that we fortuitously have all the same systems. So one thing that we're doing right now is talking with the Educational Advisory Board, EAB, which is our student advisement system as well as the university student advisement system, to say, hey, how about we just start with this very high impact, high feasibility, port over all of our transfer notes from our advisors to your advisors. Before we even get into can we surface a full 8-semester pathway for our whole system, just what are all these really quick wins that start building the culture that way. Data exchange, I've got up there, I think this is actually John Fink, but it was a quote from CCRC about how students do in fact fare better when they get their associates, because it's, as Rhode Island mentioned earlier, there's 2 very clear benefits. One is the lifetime earnings if you don't get it, and the bachelor's, and 2, the psychological momentum if you do. So I think that to that end, we're making sure that we're being a lot more intentional in getting into classrooms in the 4-year space and really solving for volume and getting as many students to reverse transfer this year. And certainly we're targeting an unprecedented number, because frankly it's something that's always happened informally and we haven't tracked it, which is funny, right? We talk about reverse transfer as this new thing, when of course for decades everybody's been transferring back their transcripts and we've just never coded it as such. So we're also going to talk about building that coding infrastructure, and also the university system I know is in a little bit of talks with using the same vendor for data warehousing that we're also looking at, and seeing if we can make sure that we've got a really fully federated data exchange there. Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I really want to touch on is just promoting the transfer mindset by pushing our web presence, New Hampshire Transfer, equivalent to some of the things that we've seen with the other states so far on this panel, and then just all these other initiatives that essentially promote that. Lots of this gets into technical stuff, but if we view pathways and articulation as a vehicle, that's something that should be built into our dual admissions program, or if we're making sure that it's very that we've got There's one program called the Public Promise, where if a student doesn't get into one of the more selective universities in the university system, that they're able to understand the community college route that can lead them back into that university system that they were seeking to go to in the first place. And then just making sure that we build that throughout the student life cycle, getting those 2+2s, making sure that our advising isn't siloed off. I mean, I do think that, you know, one problem with all these websites, you know, New Hampshire Transfer very much included, is that I know at least on the community college front, you know, we've got career advising, transfer advising, general advising, as if it's all not the same. And so then there's going to be this, you know, website over here, hey, by the way, this is where all the transfer information is, but you had to like specify that you were going to seek transfer advising in the first place. We're really trying to make this all integrated into one on our site, so then that way people actually avail themselves of these great tools we're creating. So that's, you know, where we're at with New Hampshire, and I think that these are all appendix type slides, so we don't need to go into them. Here you go.
Hey folks, so I'm going to stand up because I'm over here in the corner, and I figured this way I can see everybody. All right, so in Rhode Island, we are working toward a 70% attainment goal. You guys heard about that earlier today. And so most of our work is oriented around this strategically. We've got a brand new commissioner, Brenda Danis here, who many of you, I'm sure, have met at other NEPI events around the country. She's always out promoting Rhode Island and trying to get things to work better and more efficiently for our students. So in promoting this 70 by 25 attainment goal, streamlining pathways for students is a key part of making our work better. We have a legislative mandate for reverse transfer that Sarah Enright talked about, how that's already underway. This is building a lot of infrastructure between our institutions. We only have 3 public institutions, as you heard. As a system, we serve somewhere around 35 to 40,000 students, which actually can be a great advantage because we're so small. We should be able to link things better and align our systems, integrate data. We've got a great longitudinal data system in our state that we're, to get back to our hockey analogy, it's just about to gain traction so that we can do tracking from K-12 through post-secondary into our workforce, and this will give us a lot of power. It also means that it can be a great tool for transfer if we can get it up to that point. But because we are small, we also have, everybody has their way of doing things, and so we need to think about creative ways to align the system. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs to change to do one uniform thing. There's got to be good ways to integrate. Some great pieces have already been in place for a number of years. One is our Rhode Island transfers that I guess for the past 10 years probably. There's a website up there. We use the test system that I'm sure many of you guys use, so our institutions have a database that they're building all the time about transfers. I'm going to shout out back there to CCRI's registrars, keeping us on our toes, right? So we have this tool. We also have a joint admissions agreement, which is similar to some of what my colleagues have been talking about up here, where a student who knows that they want to transfer to a 4-year institution can start at our community college and get on a very clear pathway that allows them admissions and also provides them a reduction in tuition and fees. So it's a great program. Problem is that it's very prescriptive. It's not as broad as some of well, we all know that students change their mind and want to go in different directions, and so sometimes they don't know that they want to be on that path from the very beginning. Sometimes they want to change their mind, and so just last summer, June 2017, our system passed a new transfer articulation policy that echoes some of the cutting edge work that I've also heard from these other states, which is if you've got 60 credits from your community college and got your associate degree, then you go in as a junior. We have a number of policy levers that came through that policy around reporting, annual monitoring, thinking about gen eds versus elective credits, but we haven't had the capacity to do the implementation of this policy. So we are now about to hire a new associate commissioner, chief outcomes officer. And that's going to be the main thing that we hand over to this person. And my hope is that she or he will come back at a future one of these meetings with Nebby and say, we're getting going with this lever finally, and we're going I'd love to be able to build, I love the idea of the transfer tickets, and we do need to do some refreshing on the tools that we have available currently, some refreshing on our advising tools, and degree analyzer tools. So we're getting there, but we also really love the opportunity to be here and discuss with everybody, get some ideas, and frantically taking notes about different tools people use so that we can start thinking about those. So please do continue to share your insights. Last thing to think about, which is coming up on the horizon for us, is adults. And it's been mentioned a couple of times here, but we have been talking a lot about traditional students who are coming from high school into the 2-year, or 2-year to the 4-year, and thinking about people who have a significant amount of skills and experience that they've gained either in the workforce or in the military, or maybe through apprenticeships, or maybe as immigrant professionals. And how can we translate those to academic credits, and then how can those credits transfer across our system? Again, this is an issue that's really key for our 70% attainment goal. We all know we're not going to get there without adults. And there are so many innovative models out for prior learning. CCRI has done some great work there. Prior learning accelerator tool that Kale has developed. I think Rhode Island College is also starting to look into that. And so one of our charges from the system office is helping to lay some groundwork with an assessment policy that will allow those credits to transfer more seamlessly and will create more uniform processes, hopefully streamline things at our institutions. And maybe even, once we get the policy in place, setting up assessment centers around our state that someone, an adult, could go into and say, hey, I've got this background, can you take a look at my background? Or maybe I can sign up for a CLEP exam and get going with some credits. And of course, we all know that once you come in with credits in your back pocket, then that creates academic momentum. It creates the sense that you belong and much higher success rates there. So we're right on the cusp with that work, and hopefully we'll have more to report in future years. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. As we're looking towards, I know in our last panel we talked a lot about transfer policy, but we're going to raise that one more time, recognizing that in Maine it's the way life should be. There are no policies. But if any of you wanted to highlight any kind of improvements to transfer policy that you can imagine or that have recently happened within your systems. In New England, the way life should be, I guess.
I think that the legislature in New Hampshire is a bunch of Patrick Henry. It's given that, are you sure you're living free if we're doing this? And so I think that what's going to be critical is what was said on the whole last panel, which is that it's not about the policy saying, by the way, reverse transfer is a good thing to do. I think that everybody's there thinking about doing it.
And I think policy is very context specific. You have to be aware are you a system? Are your schools linked in a system? Are they separate entities? All of that matters in terms of not only what kind of policy you create, but who creates it. One of the interesting things about Connecticut is that policy I showed you is a Board of Regents policy. And that is related to a legislative policy. But don't tell any of the legislators, we have not honored the legislative policy. We honor the DOR policy. It doesn't coincide with the state policy. But I think context is important in creating policy, and I think making sure you know who should be at the table to create that policy. One of the things we know in Connecticut, in our context, it's often very difficult to get the right voices for higher education at the table talking about policy on the legislative level. So when we do create policy, we often look at our Board of Regents. That works for us because all 17 schools fall under that single Board of Regents. Other states may have cooperative relationships where Wisconsin, I think, is well known for having some pretty good cooperation among their colleges. They're not a system, but they talk to one another, so maybe they don't really need policy. And the one thing I will say in terms of policy, I think we need to be careful about, and it's, is when you do develop block transfer seems to be something that states like. They like to legislate block transfer, create 30 credits, 35 credits. And I think understanding how complicated that can be for the institutions to actually do, for the community colleges to meet that and for the four-year schools to receive that, I think some attention to how exactly you word that block transfer. You know, I know it's nice to think about competency, but credit is still kind of our coin of the realm, and if you can't kind of connect it up to credit and help students who don't complete a block to transfer, then you're not really perhaps helping as many students as you could. That's a specific example I would give.
One thing I would add about Massachusetts, since I've been here, and we've had a spirit of transfer, and I apologize for not saying this earlier, that's been around for decades. Our Gen Ed Foundation predates when I was born. I can say that out loud. And there's only been one change to it, which has been we moved from requiring, it was 35 credits, and then it went down to 34 around the natural and physical sciences, and only required one of them to be a lab. I mean, it's making sure that it's iterative and that we're not afraid to revisit things that may have not worked. I think I shied away from that for a while, but I think we got a lot of really good feedback from faculty and from the experts that are at the campuses. So while the policy remains the same, we're constantly, not constantly, but we're regularly now updating our guidelines, and they hadn't been updated for quite a long time. So I think evaluation is really important, and making sure that you're creating that space to learn some things that you could do better is something that I'm really interested in doing. Transfers of gardening, you have to continuously water. If you walk away from any of our agreements, they're just not going to thrive, and so it's paying attention to that. So, and I think hiring staff is a really big part of that. So, I feel like it's a good choice for Rhode Island.
So as you talk about that, it brings up some of the challenges when you're thinking about transfer. Generally, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome with some of the initiatives that you've highlighted?
Money. I think our campuses are resource strapped, and you saw all of the things that we're doing, and oftentimes it's the same group of people doing all of this work. So capacity building and making sure that we're taking our time and doing things right, and not necessarily doing everything at the same time, which I think can be a challenge when you have an administration or external folks that really want you to move forward rapidly, and kind of pushing back and saying now's not the right time, give us a year and we'll be in a better place to do it. And I want to go back to your point around the system. We have a lot of really exciting things happening that sometimes start at the community colleges, and one is around prior learning assessment. They built this beautiful website. And I just heard from a student who graduated from North Shore Community College, and she had earned 33 credits through PLA. I'm afraid that when she transfers, what's going to happen to those credits? So making sure that when a lot of innovative work is happening in one silo, that all of the segments recognize that work, I think is really important. And context does, whether or not you're operating as a system, and I think Massachusetts is trying to do more of that.
I've already talked about audit, but anybody who's involved in transfer should spend a day with registrars auditing transcripts and just learn what it takes. And being aware of the kind of work you have to do to get that transcript to transfer the way you promised the student it would. But I want to pick up, Alina, on two things you said. One you just said, and that is when students transfer to four-year schools, at least in our state, students swirl. By the time they get to the four-year school, they maybe have transcripts from 2, 3, 4 institutions. I don't know what it's like in other New England states, but tradition in Connecticut is that the state university will re-audit all of those transcripts. And so the student is kind of in a no man's land until those transcripts from all of those institutions get re-audited. One of the key conversations we had, and I can't emphasize enough, cross-functional conversations. You've got to know what other people are doing, what they know, what their capacities are, what their limits are. But we got an agreement for our TAP, our transfer ticket students, that when the CSU receives the students, the community college audit, grad audit, is nearly final. if by some change in that audit, it would be to the advantage of the student, this is mostly going to happen when students change majors in the 5th or 6th semesters, which by the way happens to 4-year students too. This is not just a 2-year student issue. Unless it's to the advantage of the student, that first 2 years, that audit at the community college level is honored. And the second thing I picked up on was you had mentioned in one of your slides, and I wrote it down, Elena, transfer principles. 2-year, 4-year partner. And one of the interesting things in our system is probably true of many of your schools, but if you look at our CSUs and you look at the graduates, on average about 50% of those students who graduate have community college credit on their transcript. And it goes as high, I think Bill goes as high about 70% in any given year at a single institution. That's a lot of students graduating in a state university who transferred in or transferred credits in. And I don't mean to put my 4-year colleagues on the spot because it's not they're not in the seat for this, but look at all of the mission statements of the Connecticut State Universities in Connecticut. You won't find any mention of receiving transfer students as part of the mission of the state regional universities. And that says something to the transfer principles of the school. And that may not be reflected in the work that registrars, transfer counselors, and advisors do for students. They work awful hard. But now I'm going to get to the challenge I want to get to. But the curriculum developed at those 4-year schools is oftentimes remarkably unfriendly to transfer into. And that, that they set sequences and requirements where you can't possibly fit 60 credits from another program in. And as long as there's a culture and a sort of transfer principle at 4-year schools that doesn't think of that and doesn't get to the level of curriculum, you're doing a lot of backbends and a lot of acrobatics to get programs to transfer. And there's some enormously packed programs in it. General education is one of the places, right? There are beautiful general education programs at CSUs in Connecticut. But they really assume the student's going to be there for all of that general education, and they're not necessarily easy to transfer into. And so part of it is thinking about what the mission of that college is, what its student body is, what its demographic is. That's been an enormous challenge to us to kind of work around that, and we've made some good progress with that. And I think we have 4-year faculty beginning to reflect upon their curriculum when they modify it, that they're going to have to transfer students into it. But that's pretty much a new conversation in our state.
And I think one of the things that I liked about the block transfer agreement that's important about it, that we developed just for the associate art degree, was that we did address that gen ed culture at all of the campuses, the university system, and that made a big difference. So what you can require for native students who stay with you for their full 4 years is not the same thing as you are now requiring of transfer students. And I think that reciprocity is going to be one of the bigger hurdles, whether it's prior learning assessment or courses from multiple institutions. And if we can figure out how to take a more block approach based on learning outcomes instead of courses, maybe that's a solution. But, I was certainly surprised with the document that was in my folder for Maine, that how many of the students are, coming with or taking out credits from another state. We got to deal with it.
So I think, the reason why the New England Board of Higher Ed convenes meetings like this is so that we can start to think about how we can work together regionally. We're all sort of having our own celebrations about things that are working well in our own states, and we're having our challenges within our own states, but then to think about how we could tackle some of these issues regionally is one of the big questions. So I'd like to open it up to questions or suggestions on that topic from some of the attendees, and then we'll go back to our panel.
I'm glad you brought up the size of majors, which is what you were sort of getting at. I mean, it's something we're pushing back on our departments, because not only does it make it difficult for students to transfer, but students within the institution that change majors. I would love to have 30 credits of unencumbered gen ed with all the double dipping and stuff that goes on. In some majors, our nursing major, for instance, students have 12 credits, that's it, that they're choosing from 2 gen ed categories. And the rest of it's all dictated through this program. Now that's an unusually high one, but even liberal arts majors are getting up into 54 credits for a history major. Well, why does it have to be that big? And I think there has to be a lot of some discipline imposed somehow. And I don't know where it comes from in your institution, or you have the authority to do that.
I remember New Jersey not worrying about this when I talked to them about transfer, and then I found out that I think it's legislated that all BAs have to have 30 credits of open elective, or limited to 30 credits of major courses, and all BSs are limited to 45 credits of major courses. And boy, if we could have had that, that'd take a while.
And I think NEAS also speaks to the minimum, not necessarily the maximum. But that's one of the things, so we're working on the transfer principles right now for the four-year institutions, and that's one of the pieces that we're looking at. So it's interesting that I'm getting nervous about nursing now.
It's not only them, even business, suddenly they need 64 credits. I'm like, what? The students are gonna be taught, when they get hired by a business, it's not like they're gonna assume they've taught them every last thing they ever need to know in every field of business.
With nursing, is some of that attached to the accreditation? And
I think some of it is.
We get a lot of that in AACSB, if you have that accreditation, they're outside of a particular region or whatever, so that makes it a little bit more complicated to ask on another layer. But we also ask about accreditors because some faculty has said it's an accreditation standard, but no one was able to show us the accreditation.
Right. Or one that meant credit.
Correct.
Yeah, you have to cover all these items, but yeah.
Chris Kylan?
Yeah, so I have a question, both are for Janet. So in terms of the block transfer, gen eds, so am I correct in understanding that the requirement for a traditional, like, 4-year student for gen ed is different?
Yes,
The block
yes.
transfer for
So at
gen
the
ed?
university, they will have certain, and Rose could, if she wants to return and speak up. So the campuses will have unique gen ed requirements based on culture, service learning, an ethical reasoning course of a very specific nature. They vary across the 7 university campuses. So what the block transfer did, because it wasn't just about community college to university, it was between the university campuses, was identify based on the leap value rubrics that in the 8 domains, these 34 credits that we did then translate into courses, that they could only add an additional limited number of credits once the students transfer or further junior, what they would expect of their juniors of that nature. So it kept it much more, limited.
So my second question is, you had mentioned this portal or self-service site where students can look at how to transfer to different institutions within the system. So is the main system on a unified manner among all the campuses?
They're on PeopleSoft,
Okay.
whereas community colleges have 7 instances of the same system, don't even talk about it. But they've done Main Street started with a course-by-course, like major inventory between the community colleges and the university, and it grew as we moved away. We still do course-to-course transfer, but it's really moved to include a more program focus. It's a very nice website. It's iterated in many different ways. I think you can go on any of the community college websites on the transfer page and find a link to Main Street, or you can find it if you Google University Main System, Main Street.
That's great. I was really
Pretty user friendly.
Yeah, we're sort of similarly at the university, community colleges do unified there, but we're not quite there. So, which would make obviously much easier to articulate. But so I was curious what the data source is, if it was shared data.
It's not really a downside, but one issue with a meeting like today is, I think of all the people in this room as the choir.
Well, that's
And so, and so when you continue to hear anecdotal stories about the transfer office, well, I can't make that decision, the department chair who decides how to accept that course, and if that person changes every year, so you get a different decision about a particular course on an annual basis. Some meetings such as this, with the kind of facts presented early on, what's going nationally, and the issues, and so on and so forth, potentially to department chairs or division deans or people like that, I think might help gain perspective rather than having all the decisions made based on a 12 by 12 four-wall room. Because today, this is all wonderful, but it is the choir. And we've got to find a way to breach some other barriers to really make some of those substantive changes we're talking about.
So I know that Doug talked a little bit about how with the National Student Clearinghouse, there's room to roam freely, you know, that if you have data that you need that you don't have, there's an opportunity there to work with the clearinghouse. Is there data, you know, you've heard a lot today, you've seen a lot, well, some of you did. I got a great close-up view this last time. And you will in the future when you get all this data and you get to, you know, download it and spend some time with it. But initially, is there anything that you feel like you're missing that could help inform that work?
I would just add to that you know, every state I think is referred to their course equivalencies database, and I think, you know, I said it already, so I'm just belaboring the point, but I think that would be a great outcome of something like this, is to get that group together to then say, all right, well, you know, we also have our own course equivalencies to your state, and then everything unfolds from there. And then pretty soon we've got a New England-wide course equivalencies database.
Is there a reaction to that from other states? Is that, yeah? Look at that, all right.
And I would just add, Candace and I really had we did a lot of boots on the ground work, so we've seen the transfer degrees, the AAs and across New England. They don't look that different from Connecticut's. I think we can go beyond and start talking about how the English transfer pathway, we had English faculty have said there's only 3 English courses. Well, that's true in Rhode Island. I think it's true in most Massachusetts, transfer English. Right, that we really look pretty similar in a lot of these 2-year degrees. And I think there's a place to have a conversation there going even beyond the course equivalency.
Any other final thoughts, either from our panel or from folks in the room, about how we might be able to work together more on a regional basis?
Yeah, that is awesome. No.
Leave it to New Hampshire.
The one piece that struck me was, I think it was changing the dialogue, changing the awareness, and the fact that lifting the information and the data and making it such a positive way that higher ed can be a player in helping all students in the area. And maybe, I don't want to just go to marketing, because it's not marketing, but that communication message and how positive this work would be may give some support to the on the ground kind of data. So that's something that our regional group and NEBI can do with the data that all says the same thing. I mean, this is very positive, it works for all types of students. So that may be a way that we can help push that whole agenda forward a little bit.
So can I echo what Sue said and just say that I hope as we move towards this interstate New England region that we're really being data driven and starting off small and looking at what are the majors that are popular across state and looking at the institutions and making sure that we're learning from that. And also sharing data with one another I think would be really exciting. It was exciting to get my Massachusetts packet, but being able to see data from the other states, I really appreciated the presentations from the other earlier this morning, because I think that should really influence the direction that we're going in. So I'm glad that it's being framed in the context of looking at the data. So thank you, Sue, and the rest of the NEBI team for really starting us off in that way.
I'd like to say, so I've been with the Clearinghouse just a little over a year and a half, and I've worked in 3 different university systems and 3 or 4 different universities. And there's something that I've noticed that you guys are talking about. The data that Doug is talking about does not get utilized across a campus the way it should, to be able to inform and make good decisions and see where the trends are. When we work one-on-one with institutions, they are surprised at many of the results of what they thought was one direction they should be going, and they end up going in another direction. And the other thing I'll say also is, the other thing that I've noticed as I've been presenting around the country, one of the things Doug knows, it's one of my die-hard things that I ask everybody in the room, are they reading the Research Center reports? And I present from registrars to admissions to financial aid to higher ed, SHIO, ECS, all those. And it's interesting to me that at the top level is who's reading the reports and making the policies, but at the lower level, they don't realize it. And I tell them a lot that they should be reading those reports and looking at that data, because that's where their policies are coming from. And so I would encourage you, one, to talk to your campuses, to look at utilizing the data more across a campus, because especially in the transfer world, we've got it for you at the clearinghouse. And 9 times out of 10, it's free. Free.
I'm the regional,
And Sue is your regional director for all of your states, so if you have questions about how to get access, she can help you. Sorry, I got on my soapbox.
Any other final thoughts before we wrap up? Well, I'd like to thank our panel, Charles, Ken, Robin, Elena, and Janet. Thank you very much.